welcome to our second-ish, I would say, Nature and Biodiversity chapter event. We're quite a new chapter, so this is our first solo effort in many respects, although technically we are actually partnering again with the Nature and Biodiversity peer group, but I'll let Ollie explain more. So today, we're here to tell you more about how to identify suppliers that have made positive progress on nature. Got an exciting agenda for you here. So we've split the agenda into three sort of sections. The first one's a bit of an introduction with some housekeeping, which Ollie said he'd kindly do. So he's going to tell us a bit about the Sustainable Procurement Pledge, sort of remind us about Chatham House rules, talk a bit about the Nature and Biodiversity peer group, and then I'll sort of explain a bit more about the chapter as well. Then we will move on to the sort of second part of the event, which is very much how do you identify suppliers that have made a positive progress on nature? And we're going to look at the sourcing strategy and how one can actually embed nature in one's sourcing strategy to be able to identify what you should be asking of suppliers. Marina's then going to take you through how to actually evaluate and compare suppliers making progress on nature. And then we thought what would be a great idea then would be to then actually head over to a third session, which is to actually start hearing from the customer and the supplier to understand how they've actually got started on nature. So Melissa, ex-Unilever and currently the co-chair of the Nature and Biodiversity peer group, will actually talk about her past experience at Unilever in helping suppliers get aligned and move in a sort of common direction. And then we have, and I'm really sorry about my pop-up moving around it continuously. And then we'll hear from Laura Lajo from Ahlstrom, who's very kindly going to tell us about how Ahlstrom got started on nature and how best to communicate with them on it as well. But I'm now going to hand over to Ollie, who's going to give you a brief introduction. Thanks, Ollie.
That's all right. Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can see my screen and good to see you all. Delighted to be here. My name is Oliver Hurry. I'm wearing a couple of hats today, which makes me very excited. In fact, that I can do two things in one meeting makes me very, very happy indeed. So delighted to be here. Just a quick mention for obviously Chatham House rules, everything that will be covered in here. We are recording the session, but just be aware of what you're saying, what you're doing, particularly from an antitrust perspective, although, of course, we really won't be covering anything too sensitive or competitive here. And then my rules, of course, just be willing to participate, really. You've got the chat, we're going to have some polls. We do want to hear about anything that you're not sure about. Don't be afraid to ask a silly question. We're all working this out together. So please enjoy the session, get involved. And it's about as much about you as it is about anyone else we've got on the agenda. So do feel like you can take part as much as you want. Right, just a quick explanation. So I chair the Champions Programme within the Sustainable Procurement Pledge. So I've been part of the original team of the Sustainable Procurement Pledge for many, many years now, and it's been amazing to see the Sustainable Procurement Pledge develop and grow. That's the logo on the left there. We'll explain a little bit more about the Sustainable Procurement Pledge in a second for those that don't know it, but predominantly, it's really about helping procurement professionals to understand in their language a range of different challenges in sustainability that they've got to get their heads around. On the right, you see the logo of the Nature and Biodiversity peer groups. This is the other hat that I wear. It's traditionally mainly for sustainability professionals, and it's trying to help them get their heads around the topic of nature and biodiversity. So if we can get both professions working together side by side, procurement and sustainability, ultimately we believe we can get more done and work together better. So that's really why I like wearing those two hats, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here. Quick mention of the Nature and Biodiversity peer group. So joined by Melissa, the co-chair here. We're relatively new, a bit like the nature chapter in this SPP. As I mentioned, mainly nature practitioners themselves who are all wondering how to engage and support procurement on nature. So hopefully they're looking forward to this partnership with the nature chapter of the SPP to really, as I said, bring those two professions together. We all want faster and more confident action on nature and biodiversity. But as I mentioned earlier, a lot of people are still working out what that is. What is good action? What is nature and biodiversity? What isn't it? So a lot of things being worked out there, which we're all on the same path, whether you work in sustainability or procurement. I'm sure you're all wondering these things. So just an introduction to the Sustainable Procurement Pledge. If you're not aware of the Sustainable Procurement Pledge, it was created by two CPOs, the CPO Bayer and CPO Henkel, Thomas and Bertrand. I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago now, when they realised that they really wanted to help procurement across all industries, really, to take ownership of the opportunity for sustainability, and not just take ownership of it, but understand it in procurement language and make all of that knowledge and content and tools that we need as procurement professionals to take action on these things available for free. And that was really the mission of the SPP, and it's become tens of thousands of procurement professionals now. And the Champions program, which I chair, which includes the likes of Avantor and Emma, is a whole selection of CPOs and heads of sustainable procurement like Emma, where a lot of work is now being getting done because we're focusing that group together on really what's the whole of procurement's responsibility, how to make it easier for them to take action. So the SPP is made up of a few things. At the heart of it is a commitment as a procurement professional to ultimately embed sustainability into what they do. And a big part of that is being allowed to by their leadership, including CPOs. The next bit of it is the community. So as well as there being a pledge, there is a community of ambassadors, which really is tens of thousands of procurement professionals who've committed to really trying to work to embed sustainability into procurement. We've got the various chapters. Chapters can be regional, like SPP UK or Kenya. They can be industry specific, like travel or pharma, or they can be topic specific. And this is the nature chapter. There's a scope 3 chapter, there's a nature chapter, there's a supplier diversity chapter, and you'll hear more about the nature chapter in a second. And there's various other different partners and collaborative elements to it as well. And of course, outside of that, we have a website where all of the tools and content will live. That's called the platform. But ultimately, we're trying to do everything in collaboration with other initiatives, hence the collaboration today with the Nature and Biodiversity peer group. It's all very romantic, but it's important. So I think that's enough from me. Hopefully that explains a little bit about what we're trying to do here. And yeah, hopefully that's useful. I'll be here throughout the session helping to facilitate as well. So if you've got any questions, let's hear them. As I mentioned, no such thing as a silly question. So please put your thoughts and your questions in the chat. And I'm sure there's people on this call here today who've also made some progress, however small, on nature and biodiversity. So we want to hear from you as well. So yeah, take part. Looking forward to this session. Over to you, Emma.
Thanks, Ollie. Perfect. So I won't spend too much time, but thanks again for sort of attending the session. As Ollie just mentioned, our Nature and Biodiversity chapter is very new. We have 2 co-chairs, which is myself. I work at a life sciences company called Avantor, and you also have Marina. I don't know if you want to shout out, Marina, and say hello.
Hello, everyone. My name is Marina Bradford, and I'm a consultant. I run sustainability consultancy Bimari, and procurement and supply chain is obviously a big area of sustainability and corporates that we help with.
Awesome. And the main aim is really just to get more people involved in procurement to actually stand up for nature and hopefully start incorporating nature into their buying decisions in short. And we hopefully aim to do this by creating awareness and understanding, by helping you get the tools to be able to start including nature in your buying decisions, hopefully start to demystify some of the nature standards and regulations, because it is a very, very broad topic, quite frankly. And as we start to grow, because we are very new, start to create a community of best practice where we can come together and have sensible discussions and think about how to innovate on nature. And hopefully, finally, when we become a bit more mature, is hopefully start to encourage all procurement professionals out there to start taking more of a leadership role on nature as well, which is where we really want everyone to head. Perfect. So on to the main event, what you've all been here for, hopefully. And I will need to keep moving this window because it keeps popping up. But in short, we were going to start off by explaining how to leverage your sourcing strategy to identify suppliers making a positive progress on nature. And the simple reason for this, if I just sort of sum up what the session's about, is that how you approach something very much determines what you're going to be asking of your suppliers. And so what I'm asking is, before we sort of rush into saying we need to ask our suppliers this, this, and that, let's take a step back and understand what are the tools available to us, what are the various dimensions we can actually go about doing this, and then based on that approach, then actually make sensible decisions. So that's what we're going to jump into now. So what I thought would be quite fun, because there's a few of us, and I know people are joining as we go, but it's just to get a slight understanding. So Charlotte, if you can, kick off the poll, understand whether you sit in procurement or you sit in sustainability or potentially somewhere else. And if you sit in sustainable sourcing but in the procurement team, please select procurement. I know it's a difficult one because you kind of span both worlds, but it would be great just to see where people are sitting.
And the poll is running. I hope that everybody's seeing it. Not sometimes we have a few issues, so apologies if you don't see it, but it should be on your screen now.
Just it shows up in comments for some people like myself. So if you haven't seen on the screen, just check in the comments in the chat.
Brilliant. And so for those in procurement, we're going to look at some procurement sort of tools. So this isn't really about teaching you your grandmother how to suck eggs. It's really about how do you incorporate nature into those existing tools. And if you sit in sustainability or watch this later at a later date, hopefully it'll give you a brief idea as to how procurement people go about doing things. So then obviously you can help your procurement colleagues do better on nature. That's the aim of it. I can't see who has filled out or not, Charlotte. So let me know if we've reached critical mass and can publish the poll, and then someone might have to shout out the answer to me.
I think we've only got 6 responses, which makes me think that only the 6 speakers could see it. I'm guessing.
Yeah, Ollie, I can't see it. I can't see it. I'm on the...
Yeah, no, that's what I was guessing. That's what I was guessing. So I think the best thing to do is put in the chat whether your sustainable is your procurement. And while Emma and the team are catching up, me and Charlotte will take a guess to see if we can work out what the rough percentage is. So put into the chat who you work.
Just to let you know, the chat doesn't work anymore. So you might have to stop the poll.
Great.
Amazing.
I can see about 6 more people messaging in the chat, and majority are in sustainability or sustainable procurement. So just like looking at the balance, so we kind of have, I think, half and half between procurement and sustainability so far.
Okay, that's awesome. Thanks, folks. Good. Okay, I'll continue trying to move this pop-up. Right. Perfect.
We can't see it, don't worry. I don't think.
Oh, well, I've just got rid of it completely, so I won't be able to drive anymore, but never mind. So guys, the ask here was, I want to be able to identify suppliers that are making positive progress on nature. That's the ask of this presentation, which came to us. So my question is, why do you want to do that? Because why you want to do it will determine the approach that you take. So I've put 3 simplistic approaches up top, or requirements, I should say. So the first one is potentially up from top. Let's say you're sitting in procurement. Someone has said, we need to source this commodity or this raw material more sustainably. And if you're lucky, you will have a product standard already in existence that you can actually align to. And then that's potentially I say, job done. Or you don't, and you find that the material that you're buying is not particularly sustainable, and there are better alternatives out there. Or you say, well, the reason I want to identify more positive suppliers on nature is because I just need to deliver my 9 nature targets. And nature targets can be quite broad. They're not just biodiversity. So funny enough, you might have a waste target. And then your job in procurement shouldn't be to unilaterally push this out to every supplier. It really should be to consider the materiality of the supplier in relation to that particular target, and then to start looking at scope and then how you would engage on that target. Or potentially you're doing all 1 and 2 already and doing a good job there. And really, as various category managers in procurement, you just want to know that you're working with people that are being more progressive on nature. So how might you go about doing that? And I'm suggesting, why not consider putting it into your sourcing strategy? So before we sort of jump into the sourcing strategy, I kind of wanted to explain the 2 dimensions that you're really facing here. Because I think it helps understand how you go about things. So if you go for sort of requirements 1 and 2, which is I want a sustainable commodity, let's say, or I have a target that just needs to go across the board and get everyone doing it, you're very much taking a horizontal approach. And procurement people tend to be split by categories, don't they? And so if you take this approach, you're literally putting a requirement out there that needs to cross multiple categories. And as a result, what tends to happen is that you end up looking at sustainability tools that really focus on what are the impacts and dependencies at your starter industry, which in this case, because of a tree, we're saying forestry commodities and forestry targets as an example. However, if you are a category sourcing procurement manager, depending on what you utilize in your company, you're probably looking at this at a category specific level, which is a vertical axis. And this creates a different approach. So you might be getting latex gloves from the rubber tree. That would be the PPE category. You might be buying chemicals, palm oil potentially. You might be buying packaging and pallets. These two sometimes go together. Or you might actually be buying tires. Again, rubber tree, 80%, right? If you take a category approach, the likelihood is you'll use very distinct tools and probably think in a slightly different way. And because nature is still relatively, I would say, an immature topic in sustainability, others like carbon are far more advanced, I think we're still getting our hands on how to do this horizontally and how to do it vertically, so we haven't quite hit our sweet spot. But that's really what we need to get to. But I do think there is benefits, guys, in sort of understanding, am I doing this on a horizontal dimension or am I doing it on a vertical dimension? Just being able to sort of tell those two apart or when they need to work together, I think is really important. And then Marina very kindly put this slide together for us. So even if you go down a vertical route, so you're going fully down a category strategy route, you still have to consider the fact that you will have corporate level targets. And so those corporate level targets will need to be considered and embedded into your category strategies regardless. But what that means is that when you look at all your categories across procurement, they will have different priority targets associated with them. So if you look at the previous slide, what you might actually have some of those categories having a deforestation target, although some may have a carbon reduction and a deforestation target. Okay, could someone go on mute, please? I think you might be speaking a Middle Eastern language, if that helps identify you. Perfect, thank you. Great, so that gives you an idea of the fact that your headline targets, regardless of whether you've met that sweet spot, will likely have to be considered. So fortunately, I think Marina shouted out that we mainly have sustainability people on this course, so this might actually be an exciting slide to see. So this is A.T. Kearney. A.T. Kearney is a procurement consultancy company. This was their original sourcing gemstone from many years ago, but it's a really nice way to kind of explain how sourcing managers approach buying, like creating buying strategies for their commodities. So I'm just going to quickly whiz around it so that everybody can kind of understand the approach. So the first thing to note is that sourcing or procurement managers are often pushed on price. That's the first thing. So that's normally your headline strategy, or often your headline strategy. They then might think, well, if I'm trying to reduce price, what might I do? I have my 10 suppliers here. If I actually reduce it to 5 suppliers, I can put more volume through 5 suppliers and therefore potentially negotiate a better rate. Potentially, you can redistribute your volume. So, for example, if you have one supplier that's actually operating better on sustainability, you can move your volume from the other suppliers to that supplier. That's a fewer supplier activity. Better product. So, I would say we've all been to restaurants where we think sort of the ingredients are getting worse and worse, and that's probably your procurement people coming up with inventive ways to actually exchange the ingredients for cheaper products, so you continue saving cost. Lots of clever ways you can do this by changing the product's makeup. For sustainability, what you're often trying to do is actually create or introduce sustainable product standards into your strategy. However, often that comes at a higher price. And that's where the better product strategy and the better cost strategy on sustainability often sort of conflict, unfortunately. Better value and usage. So this is where you kind of look at your supply chain and think, can I derive better usage or inefficiencies from it by changing things around? So you might create a central distribution center for you and your suppliers, which would be more efficient. It would reduce your greenhouse gas emissions and potentially reduce your costs as well. So that's working together to sort of improve your value chain. Better relationship. So here, often you in-house stuff or you can out-house stuff. That's a very simple sort of example of that. And I'll come on to explain more about this. And then global sourcing is an interesting one because you might be working in a monopoly situation. So you actually want more suppliers to be able to increase your buying power, and also more suppliers that come to you with better alternatives. Or potentially you're sourcing from a geography and you think, well, this geography is higher risk. I need to move into a different geography with a lower risk, or potentially a better risk for sustainability as well. So that's an overly simplistic way as to how sourcing and procurement managers sometimes view the world and think about, well, how am I going to improve what I'm currently buying? So I'm going to quickly go through a wooden pallet example, mainly because pallets are quite an easy thing for one to get one's head round. And we've got a chain of custody certification there for wooden pallets, which is FSC or PEFC. Generally, the pallet industry does use PEFC. So for this example, I will start with PEFC. So we'll go round it again, but I'll start with better product. So let's imagine now that your sustainability team has said, we need deforestation-free products. You've gone, oh, yikes, how do I do this? Let's sustainably source by actually making sure that all our wooden products have PEFC or FSC certification. So you run off and do that as an example. You think, right, easy, something to do on the sort of product strategy side of things. However, doing that increases your cost, which is really a no-no for this strategy, which is what you're always trying to achieve. So potentially you then go, well, if I make my pallet last longer and put metal brackets on it, then I can offset the fact that I'm actually having to buy in a slightly more costly pallet because it has better credentials associated with it. That might be a good way to sort of meet everybody's requirements. However, now not only do you have deforestation as a potential sustainability issue, but you have metals in your supply chain now. So you potentially have mining now in your category as well. So there's things to consider. Or you might say, well, I've just been approached by this other pallet supplier that does HDPE pallets. Now that then takes me away from my deforestation target. It's significantly cheaper. They last 10 years. Oh, and they also do recycled content. So all the HDPE is coming from recycled content. If I do a life cycle assessment or I do a bit of intelligent Googling, I can find out very quickly that this pallet now has a much better life cycle assessment analysis than my wooden pallet. So maybe I should do this. And this is where it gets interesting, because now you're not following a demand from above, which is just make my pallet PEFC certified. You're actually thinking slightly differently and thinking, how can I get benefit in a different way and still meet good sustainability targets? Because this would reduce your GHG emissions potentially. If you go into better value or usage, you could think, well, currently I'm not recycling the pallet, or I haven't been given a recycling option end of life here. So could I potentially work with them to do a closed loop model whereby I send the pallets back to them and then they're able to sort of turn them back into pallets, which would be amazing. Again, lowering my life cycle analysis assessment. If I'm buying wooden pallets, could I actually get the company to take back the broken wooden pallets and use that in their burners to actually help set new pallets? Because in actual fact, you need a lot of heat to actually set new pallet creation for wooden pallets as well. Then for a better relationship, you're thinking, well, I've got that all in place. So could I be really cheeky here and just lease out my pallets so it's no longer on my books? Or could I get all my product suppliers to take this on board so that I don't have to look after it? I like pallets isn't a main commodity for us. So make it someone else's problem potentially. Or do I want to be super responsible and say, actually, we're going to in-house it all and make sure that we're taking responsibility for all pallets, or potentially we're working with all our suppliers that actually have pallets in our distribution model and saying to them, actually, guys, let's all align on this model. Let's all do it together. Let's all be sensible together. Then you come here and you think, well, I've had all these great plans, but none of these actual suppliers are in my actual portfolio of suppliers. So now I need to expand my supplier base, or potentially I have an option of someone working in this country that has a lower risk than versus this country, which has a different risk. So then you can think about that. And then at the end of it, you could probably think, well, I could probably consolidate now to one supplier who's doing a sterling job and who I've tested this all out with potentially. So this is kind of how you could potentially work these ideas through. I will come on to the answer as to why this is all important. But I do want to just sort of put this one slide in, because often when all of us, it's not even just procurement people, it's all of us, we have this terrible habit of often when we look at life cycle assessments or product carbon footprints, of going from sort of cradle to gate. never cradle to grave. So what we don't look at is the end of life of that product. And I just wanted to put up the end of life of sort of HDPE here, just to show you the difference between sending potentially that pallet to incineration versus recycling it. There is a massive difference. So my ask here is, when you're thinking these things through and you're thinking of your options when you're going through your sourcing strategies, don't discount end of life. It has a big impact. So what's the answer to all of this? So you've gone around your sourcing cycle and you've come up with lots of options which have pros and cons, admittedly. So then you look at your biodiversity mitigation hierarchy, which first says, try and avoid your impact on nature or biodiversity. If you can't avoid it, minimize it. If you can't minimize it, restore it. And then worst case scenario, offset it. So interestingly, often when we do this, we look at one without even realizing it. So in actual fact, what you're doing is you're getting all these sourcing options, and then you have to overlay avoidance, minimization, restoration, offset across all of them. So you have different strategies that you can opt for. So strangely, your plastic pallet will be quite a good avoidance one. If it's fully circular, you're not going to be making a huge impact on nature. However, your wooden one, once you've got PEFC certification, once you've made it last longer, may have elements of avoidance, probably higher minimization. So what you'll tend to find is your plastic pallet may have a larger avoidance graph. Your wooden pallet may have a higher minimization bit, but at the end of the day, they still don't get to the top. And so you still then need to look, well, if I opt for these two and I can see what strategies I'm employing to reduce my impact on biodiversity, how do I get to a 0 point? How do I get to net zero, in short? And you might then think about restoration. Funny enough, restoring renewable items is a lot easier than restoring plastic impact, I would say. So funnily enough, actually finding the forest that you've had an impact on and working with forestry companies to actually see how you can restore the impact you've had will be a far easier task than trying to understand how you can restore where plastic has had its impact often. And then if you're offsetting, again, I would say for wood, I think more people are used to offsetting wood than they are plastic. However, the South Pole recently had a really clever offsetting model. And I know there's another certification company that says Repurpose that has a certification model for offsetting. And what that really means is that you're not really restoring where you had an impact. What you're doing is you're paying into something to restore to the same level where you had an impact, but not necessarily the same place, in short. So the funny thing I would say here is, when you're coming up with these decisions and you're going around your sourcing cycle and coming up with these options, think about, am I actually avoiding? Am I actually minimizing? And if I had to do restoring and offsetting, how easy is it? And then compare all four against each of the sourcing options that you've come up with in totality, because that will give you a good idea as to which one to go forward with. So what does that mean in relation to, I would say, how do I identify a positive supplier on nature? Well, I think it means this. If I'm going for a plastic pallet, the questions that I would want to know of my supplier are distinct to those going for a wooden pallet, because I'd want to know if they have circular models in place. I'd want to know if they're being innovative and actually thinking about offsetting plastics and finding ways to actually reduce their impact in the plastic industry. Very different questions and very different KPIs than if I was going for a wooden pallet, which would all be about forestry. So my point here is, do consider your approach, because that will very much determine what you're going to ask your supplier and how you should then identify suppliers by how positive they are on nature, in short. Cool. So that's my little bit. And not that the polls are working, but what I thought I would ask here is, do you think we should invest time in understanding how to incorporate nature into sourcing strategies?
Can you remember what the answers were?
It's yes,
Was it
no,
yes or
and
no?
maybe. Yeah. Right, I'm going to see if I can find my thing again. No.
I can see some responses coming through, but also lots of yeses coming up on the screen as an icon, as an emoji. So that's looking positive.
Okay.
And so far, it's all yeses.
I don't think we're doing it as well as we could, guys. That's why I'm suggesting what people think.
I'd be interested to know if anyone, I doubt anyone will say no necessarily, although I suspect some people might think it's not going to be easy and there are reasons why it wouldn't be easy. Be interesting to know if there's anyone has got any thoughts about how it's not just quite as simple as saying, yes, let's do it. What any objections or challenges are that people would have. That might be a better way to do it.
I think it's really specific to each category, and I think that's what makes it quite time consuming. Yeah, is that if you take a category approach, it's as if your sustainability team needs to sit with each category manager to kind of but tag team it with them to think about what are all the options and alternatives that we could actually investigate. Yeah, and then do some analysis on them as well, which is quite time consuming. That's why I chose a palette. It's relatively easy, guys. They're much harder products out there. Right, I'm going to hand you over to Marina, who's now onto the main event, which is that once you've thought about your sourcing strategy, how do you then actually start to evaluate and compare suppliers making progress? Go on, Marina, tell me when to move.
No pressure. Just give me 1 second because before we move. So I just maybe wanted to summarize the connection between the section. And Emma's just talked to you about the different strategies and how that may vary in the connection of the strategy decision making to your overarching strategy. In this section, what I wanted to share is a bit of a framing or a framework even as to how you can approach it before you deep dive in the actual KPIs. So we talked about the fact that there's a link to what your corporate priorities are, and maybe you've done some double materiality assessments, maybe you've decided strategy in a different format. So how that will cascade into your supply chain conversations will probably show up at different levels. And those would be the levels and approaches that I wanted to share with you. So if you can move to the next one, just to look at the essentially 3 different approaches, no matter which strategy you go for, or no matter which level you're going to be in terms of your sourcing conversations, essentially you have 3 levers where you're going to be able to make those evaluations and how you're then deciding to integrate your nature strategy. So you can think about how you buy and why you buy. And so are we changing the system and approach? And an example that Emma has shared was, are we actually buying a product? Or are we now outsourcing the entire thing? Are we just buying a service on the base of product? And some things like printers is always a good example. You just buy printed pages. But a palette is also a good example. Do you actually buy pallets, i.e. you're specifying the material and the transparency, etc., or are you just buying a service and outsourcing the management of that part, and then the third party will just provide you with a service, and therefore it will be in their responsibility and interest to maintain the life of that pallet and make sure it lasts for as long as possible. So through changing the approach as to how you're purchasing, do we actually have an opportunity to start thinking more circular? Does that create a different set of incentives? And actually through shifting the approach to buying, are we also supporting the way that the system or industry works? So are we incentivizing the kind of services that help us achieve sustainability strategies overall? And you will have some opportunities across those different categories and products to do that if you think about circular economies and creating incentives for ownership of the materials. And the system sort of service-based approach often gives that sort of an incentive. The second lever that you would have in terms of where you would make a comparison would be at the supply level. Supplier as an entity. So who are we actually buying from, and how is that particular organization either aligned or misaligned to your values, to your commitment, to the level of ambition on sustainability or nature specifically that you may have? Do they themselves have the knowledge, expertise, and any kind of action plan? And are we also supporting the organizations who will be able to shift that sort of dial and who will be able to partner with us? because at that level, you have a little bit more of that visibility and potentially trust that whatever products you buy from them or services may have a different footprint. So you kind of have a different level in terms of the alignment. And sometimes that shows up in some of the requirements, as we want to work with organizations who are committed to nature targets. We want to work with organizations who have SBTI aligned decarbonization targets. Maybe some of organizations want to work with somebody who's got certain certifications. So that always shows up in terms of how we evaluate the suppliers who would want to be our partners before you go down the level of a product. So at that stage, you also have some options in terms of how you would integrate your expectations and who you want to have on your roster. And the third level that you have an ability to start integrating some of your requirements would be at the actual product or material. So what do you actually want that product to have, or how do you want that to have an impact or not to have an impact, would be the next level of an opportunity. So here you're focusing, irrespective of how and who you buy it from, you've decided you want a particular commodity or material product. So now how do we ask the question, what do we actually integrate, and how do we compare that one product is somehow better or less impactful or differently impactful on nature than another one? So this would be the approach that we will look at in a second. If we can move to the next slide, Emma. This is an example of how you can start approaching at a product level criteria. So what sort of things might you be able to include in your RFPs, RFQs, or any kind of engagement? And there are going to be maturity stages here, and we're not going to be able, for every category or for every product, always set the same level of expectation. It may be because some of the metrics or data might not necessarily be available yet for that commodity. It may be because your organization itself might not yet be in a position to know what kind of questions to ask, or it may be that the market with which you operate in doesn't necessarily yet have that level of maturity generally, or maybe we just don't even know which one it is. We are just starting that journey. So from that perspective, it may be helpful to go through sort of a little bit more of that maturity and start somewhere. So the starting point in terms of how you may be engaging or including your requirements could be just from the perspective of collecting information. So do you track anything? Do you have any metrics? How do you approach the topic? Do you have any information about the locations of raw materials that you're sourcing from? And these kind of questions would be really helpful when you don't actually currently have any transparency in supply chain, or maybe some elements of it. So for those of you who are dealing with CSRD requirements, or will have to deal with CSDDD requirements, that's becoming a real serious issue. Normally, maybe in the commercial negotiations, if you have multiple tiers, that wasn't always much of an interest as to where particular components, ingredients, or activities were taking place. But now this will become something you'd have to report. So starting from just tell me what we know so you can understand where your risks might be. How far are you able to actually have visibility? So therefore, where maybe you have exposure, maybe not, could be the starting point of comparison. So by asking those questions, you can start seeing who's actually able to provide you that information. Once you have a bit more information around that transparency and who's doing anything at all, you could move to actually enforcing compliance. So this is the element where you may have your own standards. You may already know what your basic requirements would be. So you want the partners you work with to actually align to what it is you're looking for. And you have very specific criteria for the products you're wanting to buy. So in the pallet example, we know that zero deforestation is a target for the organization. We know it applies to this particular pallet in a current case scenario. We don't yet have circular plastic pallet services. And we know that PEFC is something that we would rely on as a way to mitigate the deforestation risk. Therefore, we wanted to ask the suppliers to confirm that they have either PEFC for the pallets they're going to be providing to us, or an equivalent. And so this way you're basically also signaling to your suppliers what good looks like in this particular relationship. And you're being very clear and specific. So in comparison, becomes much more straightforward. You either have PEFC or FSC certifications, or you do not. And so as a procurement person, you can start making those decisions. But that works where you've actually got those corporate level targets set for you, and you've decided what sort of risk mitigation is going to be appropriate and acceptable for your organization. When we have done all of those basics, and maybe in some organizations who have got a little bit more activity and more history in evaluation and more expertise in nature, you can start thinking about actually how might we come up with new solutions, or how might we collaboratively with the supplier help support the target that we already have in ways we haven't thought about as a buyer. So we thought about PEFC, but is there a different way? So actually, if we wanted to reduce our impact on biodiversity in a category, whether it's wood or whether it's plastic, we can actually then go to the supplier and ask them the question of how would you suggest we could do that? What are you able to offer us? So at that stage, again, the comparison becomes which one provides maybe a more innovative solution or a solution that offers better environmental outcome, so at outcome level rather than specification level. And here you can start thinking about, well, actually, these kind of suppliers offer the products that are very much fitting to our targets and helping us accelerate the target, meeting those targets quicker. So you can compare the suppliers within that category in terms of how much more they're able to offer you or how quickly those targets can be met if you partner with them. What you're going to be starting to see is that you can't actually compare a product that is being offered in category 3 to category 1, but you immediately can probably segment your suppliers and the kind of products and categories you're buying in terms of where they would fit. So you can also adjust your expectations and how you would be demanding certain things of them. And the final and kind of the end game that is necessary for acceleration of a lot of the targets, but probably isn't currently the case for most of organizations, is when you're actually evaluating product level in a partnership innovative scenario. So actually you're partnering with some of the specific suppliers to address a very specific problem on nature outcomes, and that starts looking like a collaborative innovation investment potentially, or things where you're starting to develop collaboratively a solution that addresses the particular commodity or the particular category level in a completely different way. And this becomes something that's leading the market, and you need to be picking very specific suppliers. So you can then start thinking about actually, if that's the kind of relationship I want, the services, the collaborative solution and design, then it's going to be very different organizations. So it's worth maybe starting to think around like, where are you as an organization playing at the moment? Where would you be comfortable to play? You know, are you in a position to actually partner? Are you in a position to specify for the different commodities what your good looks like? Or do you just want to understand what is possible and you actually want to relay some of that onto the supplier to offer you the better solution based on what may be available, based on their expertise and experience? And then within those categories, you then have a bit more of an opportunity to start making those comparisons. At this point, would be good actually to hear back from you in terms of the maturity of your own organizations and criteria. And maybe if you can just drop it in the chat if our polls not going to behave. How mature are your nature criteria? Where would you say between those 4 buckets, the criteria that you're including in RFPs are currently sitting?
Shall I just
get back?
Shall I just go back to the slide so they can see the 4?
Yeah.
4 versions. You could just write 1, 2, 3, or 4 and be really lazy, guys.
I'll do some quick maths, work out the average. Be pretty impressive.
And I can see a comment in the meantime. Don't we think that we need to establish a compliance policy for all suppliers and buyers to be respected during procurement process? I agree, and I would say that's your level 2. So once you have worked out actually who you're working with and what you expect for the different categories, then that becomes your baseline. But very often organizations don't necessarily have that visibility, don't necessarily know what sort of suppliers and what is possible. So the step before that would be just to understand what is being done, because it well may be that your compliance baseline is lower than some suppliers are already working on. And so if that's the case, you want to make sure you actually push it a little bit further and get better outcomes.
I'm going to also answer that as well, guys, because it's funny how we always run to sort of generic compliance models. And I guess the whole point of going down a category route is, I'm just going to give you an example in human rights. Like, you might just come up with a standard in your team that says, guys, everyone do ETI base code. That's our big corporate standard. Everyone follows that. And there's no reason to not follow that. It makes perfect sense. But I do sometimes wonder if we get so reliant on these generic standards that it sort of stifles innovation and it stops people from going off and doing something even better. So that's what I would just say. Don't get too reliant on these big general standards. Start to sort of innovate in your own category, because I think we're possibly one of the, I come from procurement, guys, so we're possibly one of the most pragmatic functions that I've ever come across, where we start with practice and then that becomes theory, in short. I think we've got a great opportunity here to be quite innovative in our own categories and come up with options that potentially people haven't considered before, and then actually take those upwards and then create standards based on that. So kind of meeting in the middle in order to create standards. Hopefully that made sense.
Maybe just worth also highlighting that if we already had all of the standards and knowledge and understanding of how to deal with it, that now becomes compliance, we wouldn't be having to solve this problem right now. So one of the acknowledgement that we probably need to have across the different categories is that the reason that we needed to manage and have these certain targets is because we haven't really solved it. We don't necessarily have the solutions available across the board. We do need to partner. We need to find different ways of doing things, because what has been known up to now hasn't really got to the right result. So from that perspective, even, it's worth considering that when something is a regulation or a certification or a compliance standard, it's probably behind what needs to happen in the market. So that's a good starting point and it's a good minimum, but it's always going to be much more effective for you from nature perspective to go beyond and find new solutions, because they commercially can also be more beneficial. But if nature is going to be the point, that does require a different approach to what has been so far the norm. Excellent. So now then, if we think about, we've thought about how we might engage, and we've thought about how we might include something in the RFP and what sort of questions we might well be asking, what's the standpoint. Now we are getting back some information and we have some review of the different suppliers, maybe across the different categories, or maybe within the same category, and you have responses from multiple organizations. How do we now decide who is going to be more advanced or who may be a bit more on a progressive line here? So this maturity sort of stages and steps are designed to give you a little bit more of an overview of the kind of things you want to be looking for. And I want to echo what Emma was saying, the specific numbers of figures or specific targets will be very specific to your category. So in some cases, you want to have zero water drawn from any kind of water bodies, and you want to have zero discharge. That may be the thing you're looking for. But in some cases, water might not be as relevant, and actually carbon is going to be the thing that you need to be concerned about. In some cases, you're just going to focus on things like invasive species and pollution creation, and you want to talk all about that. So it really will depend on the specific, but in terms of the kind of things you look out for, that will give you an indication of how one or the other may compare, would be fairly standard. And they probably not very rocket sciencey in terms of the headlines that you've seen. So the starting point would be somebody who is essentially becomes your risk hotspot. So if an organization is not offering any kind of transparency of product supply chain, we don't know where the materials are being sourced, we don't know what kind of forest and what kind of sites they come from, we can't actually make an assessment of nature impact. And that often is the challenge, especially for commodities, where they kind of go into a number of different stages and hands and locations. If an organization itself doesn't offer any kind of tracking or measurement of environmental impact in the supply chain, and for the particular product you're buying is not available either, chances are they're probably not going to be able to offer you significant benefit. So that also becomes a risk. From the reporting perspective under CSRD, CSDDD, that is a risk in itself, because you're expected to have that transparency so you can see what exposure is. Similarly, on the other aspects, whether they are able to offer any kind of expertise, do they have any competency within the organization, do they have their own commitments? All of those sort of absences signal that it's probably going to be quite risky unless some sort of actions are being taken, versus another supplier who may be offering you the solution to the particular category, and they are in fact somewhere in a supporter category. So they've already mapped their supply chain for this particular product that you're asking for. They've done some sort of basic nature risk assessment. They've identified some things that are going to be highlighted to you as a risk, and they've told you what they may be planning to manage to manage it. Maybe they're already taking action on that. They may have their own commitments. Maybe they haven't necessarily done all of the detailed work, but maybe as a corporate, as an entity, they've already said that they're committed to, for example, TNFD reporting, or maybe they have committed to identify the key hotspots on nature by the end of next 6 months. anything that indicates that they actually have the commitment and resources within their organization, and therefore whatever it is going to be buying from them is likely also going to have benefit of that, and potentially even an improvement depending on what kind of plans they have in place. If you also can see that they've actually used the latest guidance, which is evolving consistently. So there's quite a lot of different tools at the moment. It can be quite complex sometimes to figure out what is the right thing for different elements, but there's an emergence and convergence of the different structures, and things like TNFD and Science-Based Targets Network would be the source of the truth at this point in time in terms of the standards on disclosures and what is required. So if you've seen that an organization is keeping an eye on the developments, if you see an organization is actually applying the tools to the materials and products that they offer into you, you also can have a little bit more of trust and visibility that they are progressing and their actions are currently aligned with what the trajectory is offering. You may have somebody in the middle who is just making a start, so they actually have some understanding, they've measured some of the environmental impact, they may be limited, they have some systems, and they're monitoring and proactively keeping up to date with what's necessary. So for example, if you're buying from somebody, let's take the same pallet, one of the requirements under net zero as well as CSRD will be zero deforestation. And if this supplier is proactively offering up the chain of custody information for their pallets and all of their materials and proactively is demonstrating to you they've thought about it, not because just you've asked them, but they've actually also looked at how to create an alternative, and they're now offering to you a circular system because based on their knowledge on nature-related impact and disclosures, you would benefit from it. You can start seeing actually, you're probably even moving to the partnership space. So purchasing a product from this particular supplier may not only de-risk you, because you can then have conversations at a similar level and they actually are going to be offering you up solutions, but the product itself that you're going to be purchasing is already contributing to your overall targets. So just even thinking in terms of where are your suppliers putting themselves by how they're responding or what information they're able to offer up to you, if you're a buyer, can give you a bit more information in terms of how to compare them within the category. Because now if you're comparing two suppliers who both are in the supported category, for example, here, they both the nature risk assessment identified key exposures, now you can compare like to like, as opposed to comparing a supplier who has created lots of innovative solutions, they've got nature on the board and various KPIs, versus a supplier who's not even started to do anything. That in itself, of course, is also telling, but it's actually really difficult and for you to, within the category or within between the two suppliers, to decide how to go about that. So obviously you want to make sure your supply chain shifts to the extreme towards partners and supporters, because that's where collaboratively you can find the right solutions and you have the information you need, but starting to understand not just by numbers, but in terms of the overall governance and the plans and the various metrics that they can offer you up, can also give you a bit of an indication of who's actually progressed further. Please note that here we haven't actually indicated any kind of specific project. So we haven't said that they have offset with certain organizations. We haven't indicated how many forest acres somebody has restored. And we haven't said that those things even matter in this case. And that's because going back to the point that Emma was making earlier, any nature-related action needs to be very specific to the impact that was created through that product. Any additional activities, such as kind of offset programs, always come on a side of, but don't really give you an indication of nature progress. They do give you an indication of additional opportunities and additional projects to positively contribute that organization may be part of. So there isn't a specific metric that you'd say this is progressive, but the progressive would be if they actually are very much applying the tools and demonstrating progress on a specific issues, so specific areas of environmental impact that the products, commodities, activities may have left behind. The slide is a bit detailed, but you can have a copy of this kind of 4 ideas, and hopefully some of this gives a bit of an indication of the kind of things to look for. But I'll wrap up at this stage to hand over to some examples from our industry partners.
Thanks, Marina. And it's probably worth noting that as a starting point, I think procurement people can actually use the slide and actually start to map out the KPIs that they think should fall under each of these headings for whatever sourcing option they want to go forward with. Using this as an example, I think would be really helpful to then know where your suppliers are falling in relation to nature. So I think it's quite a useful tool. Great. We're going to hand over to Melissa, who's ex-Unilever, to tell us a little bit more about your Sustainable Agricultural Code, how that came about, hopefully.
Thanks, Emma. Hi, and as you guys were speaking, I was thinking of more and more Unilever examples that we can tell, so I'll try and weave those in. But yeah, hi everyone. My name's Melissa Miners. I was at Unilever for 11 years. I'm still consulting for them, but I was one of the editors on the Sustainable Agriculture Code, so it's quite close to my heart. And I think that's where what I'm gonna talk about. And before that, I worked at an organisation called Hill and Knowlton, where my client was the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil. And it has big links to kind of compliance and trying to get companies to actually do some great things on nature. So the reason I wanted to talk about the Sustainable Agriculture Code is to Emma's point about kind of regulation stifling creativity and being able to kind of look at innovative ways to engage suppliers and move in the masses on nature. And the Sustainable Agriculture Code was originally developed in 2010 and then redone in 2015 and 17, but it was at a time where we didn't have all of this regulation. So now the Sustainable Agriculture Code is implemented with suppliers and farmers. Now the job is for Unilever to kind of fit this into regulation and look at the way that this is verified and reported on. But at the time, actually, just to give you a little bit of scale of why we even needed to develop our own code, Unilever has 52,000 suppliers, over 45 billion euros worth of procurement spend. And a large chunk of this, and Unilever's biggest impact on nature, is through its agricultural sourcing. So the opportunity really was to kind of be able to look at the supplier base and start to segment and organise and aggregate suppliers and get them to act on nature on the farm. And just to give you kind of an example, the Sustainable Agriculture Code is mainly aimed at the fruit and vegetable suppliers. So this is over 500 suppliers, which reach out to over 50,000 growers and farmers. So when we try and, well, I say we, I'm ex-Unilever, but when we try and talk about this, it would really be in the kind of, we believe, and we have evidence to show that we engage hundreds of thousands of suppliers on this. So the challenge was to align suppliers on sustainable agriculture practices, and the process that we went through was firstly seeking external advice. You know, there's many, as you can imagine, many trade organisations, many NGOs that have a strong opinion on what Unilever should be doing on agriculture. So there was a whole big stakeholder engagement process and a number of workshops to interview each of these organisations. Greenpeace were heavily involved, Rainforest Action Network, and to really kind of identify where the problem was and what should be done. We worked with mainly in terms of industry platforms, mainly the SCI platform, Sustainable Agriculture Initiative. We had people sitting on the board of that, sitting on the board of the Called Farm Tool, and had this network of advisors that helped us develop this. So that was the initial step, and then there was the process to segment suppliers and identify the top suppliers and engage with those in terms of what was feasible. And I think the kind of the principles that the Sustainable Agriculture Code follows will not surprise you, as pest management, water, soil quality, etc., etc. But I think what is, sorry, I'm losing my voice very rapidly. I think what is kind of unique about the Sustainable Agriculture Code is the journey to verification and the process that it went off. So it was made up of, in terms of compliance, it was made up of 3 types of requirements. So the mandatory requirements, the contractual things that suppliers had to sign up against in their main contracts, the expected requirements, and then the leading requirements. And the whole kind of ethos around the Sustainable Agriculture Code was to engage suppliers for the long term. There's also a programme at Unilever called Partner for Purpose, which is about having these strategic long-term relationships with suppliers where you can show them examples of biodiversity improvement on farms, take them kind of through a journey, and that's something that continues to happen at the moment. And then to be considered compliant with the Sustainable Agriculture Code, you had to be measured by the combination of supplier and farmer requirements. And as I said, this the mandatory piece was 100% of all applicable requirements. Expected was 70% of applicable requirements, and leading was continuous. There was no minimum percentage required. So this was a huge process that went on, and I think that the huge job that's to be done now at Unilever is to turn this in, and I know that there's a whole team working with PwC to turn this into kind of CSRD required information. So I'm going to stop there, Emma, because I'm really losing my voice, but I'm happy to answer any questions in the chat.
Thanks, Melissa, don't worry, but thanks for sharing your thoughts there. Sorry that you're losing your voice. So guys, do hold on to those questions for Melissa, or just scribble them down in the chat, and then she can sort of come back to you directly if you like. But just to save Melissa on voice, we'll move on to the next section, if that's all right. So Ahlstrom has very kindly, so Ahlstrom, funny enough, is one of Avantor's suppliers, and they're one of the few suppliers that at least have reported, I would say, openly on getting started on nature, which is why we're really happy to sort of invite them. So I'm going to hand you over to Laura, who's going to introduce herself, and then hopefully tell you a bit about who Ahlstrom are before diving into the nitty-gritty and sort of talking about their sort of nature efforts.
Yeah, thanks Emma for having me. So good afternoon, everyone. On my behalf as well, my name is Laura Laiho, and I'm a sustainability specialist at Ahlstrom. And yeah, happy to be able to share how we got started on nature and biodiversity. So I'll give you a brief introduction first to Ahlstrom, as I think we're not as known as maybe Unilever. So we're a global leader in fiber-based specialty materials. We're a privately held company, and we have headquarters in Helsinki, Finland. We have a global coverage with about 7,000 colleagues, and our operations take place in 37 plants in 13 countries, and we have more than 6,000 customers in over 100 countries. And if you go then to the next slide. So the cornerstone really of our business is the understanding and expertise we have in using sustainable fiber-based raw materials to create products that can be used to solve global challenges. And you can see here some of the kind of mega trends that Ahlstrom has identified as something that our products can really help solve. And maybe you can also kind of find some that are relevant to your business as well. So for example, we have filtration materials to help provide clean air and water, or then materials for life sciences like Avantor to support in development of personalized and affordable healthcare. And we believe that with our kind of safe and sustainable solutions, we can make a change in the world. And these megatrends are kind of that we have identified here are also then closely related to the Sustainable Development Goals, which we think is important to align our business with and ensure that we are also future-proofed as a company. So having this type of product portfolio that can solve some of the world's sustainability challenges makes us also kind of obligated to ensure that we do our business in a responsible and sustainable way. If you go to the next slide. The base of our sustainability work and nature work really is our ESG framework, which is quite a traditional approach, but it works for us. And there we have identified the focus areas and ambitions. And kind of we have identified and mapped out the material topics that are key to start building the foundation for sustainability work. And we want to ensure that we cover all aspects, also social and governance. And I would like to just highlight before going into the environmental pillar, which is maybe more the focus here, but that having a good governance and social aspects also is crucial in making a lasting impact. And that's why we work hard to ensure that we have kind of good governance starting from top management and good reporting practices in place. And also then regarding our social focus, we want to have kind of a lot of engagement with our employees and train them also on sustainability, so that sustainability topics are considered in all decisions throughout the kind of business and not just included in the work done by the sustainability team. But then if we move on to the environmental pillar, even we don't have a kind of specific topic that is titled nature, but there are kind of still multiple topics here that belong to or then are closely related to nature. And you can see waste, air pollution, biodiversity, and then forest in terms of certified fibers and wood. And you know, if you, depending how you define nature, you could argue that everything here belongs to nature. And I think many of these are material to essentially all businesses, but as Ahlstrom is so reliant on natural fibers, a big focus is really on the certified fibers and then biodiversity as a new topic. And then on top of this kind of foundational pillars, we have focus on our product portfolio in our framework. We just this year launched a safe and sustainable by design approach, which is used in our innovation process to ensure all products are checked from a sustainability and safety perspective. And there's a specific focus on substances of high concern and circularity, which again are very much nature-related topics, even though we don't kind of say out loud that they are nature-related. And all this is done to reach then our ESG differentiation goal of having products that purify and protect, that are delivered with enhanced circularity, and that we move away from towards fossil-free and then decarbonize, at least in line with science-based targets. Then, if on the next slide, how do we then approach the major sustainability topics that we have identified in our framework? I have here listed some of the approaches and tools we use with the focus on nature-related topics. And these are divided now into 3 categories, but they are still very much interconnected and linked to each other. If we first look at how we work with our products and customers, we have the safe and sustainable by design approach I just described to ensure all products have been developed with nature in mind. And then we have automation of life cycle assessment, so LCA, which this is currently in pilot phase, but our goal is to have credible science-based LCA data of the environmental impacts our products have, so that we can really give our customers the kind of science-based accurate facts. Then if we move to operations and sourcing, the backbone here is really our SBTi commitment we have made and the science-based targets we have set, which are currently actually being validated by the initiative. So we have already worked a couple of years in building roadmaps and reducing our own scope 1 and 2 emissions in our own operations. And now with our scope 3 targets in emission reduction, we have also really strengthened our approach in sustainable sourcing and biodiversity. And lastly, we have regulations and reporting. Of course, as mentioned, everyone operating in Europe will be affected by the CSRD and EUDR in case of the forest value chain. But then reporting also through EcoVadis and CDP is great in getting kind of the idea and kind of the North Star on where to focus if you want to be on top of the class. And for example, this year was the 2nd year when CDP had an option to report on biodiversity, and this really pushed us into joining the UN Global Compact Finland's program on setting the science-based targets for nature. So we have just started this. Then if we go to the next slide, to make sure that we actually then kind of walk the talk, we have multiple KPIs which we are measuring to see our progress on nature and other topics. And here I just took a screenshot of our sustainability report where we have listed kind of the most material ones. But you can see that there's the carbon dioxide reduction, our water intake, waste to landfill, responsible sourcing, and then also I think important one, the sustainable innovation as our nature targets. Then on the next slide, I wanted to give kind of a concrete example of what we have done for biodiversity, and I think this is also a nice example of our value chain collaboration. So Ahlstrom, together with our own supplier Metsä Fibre and then our customer 3M, as well as then we had a consultancy called Earthworm Foundation, have collaborated since 2019 in order to identify and implement best practices that support biodiversity, healthy forest landscapes, and responsible forest management. And then next year, the idea is that we'll focus even more on biodiversity. And I think this really kind of highlights that we can have the BFC and FSC certificates, but then if you want to go further, this is one way of doing that in the value chain. And this is done because it's crucial to understand that nature issues are joint challenges for the whole value chain. And without collaboration and transparency, it is difficult to reach kind of meaningful change. So the risks and opportunities are everyone's responsibility and not just, in this case, Metsä Fibres, who would be the kind of material producer. Then on the next slide, I have kind of made a list of some of the key insights on how to get started with nature, or how we at Ahlstrom at least started. And I'm not saying that we would be perfect in these topics or kind of super mature, but I think these are some points that we have learned along the way. So firstly, of course, top management buy-in is crucial because these topics require kind of organization-wide collaboration. So getting the mandate to kind of demand other functions besides just your sustainability team to work on this is important. Then, kind of doing your materiality assessment, which was already mentioned by others as well, just to understand which issues are important. So for us, since 95% of our fiber is coming from natural sources, we want to really focus on ensuring sustainable and certified sourcing from woods, and also to ensure that we have the raw material available to us also in the future. Then it's good to define policies and principles that describe the commitments, ambitions, and targets, and this formalizes the efforts really in the company and helps in communication both internally and externally. Next, I think it's important to have kind of pragmatic roadmap that is supported by science and facts, and change takes a long time. So having quantifiable milestones helps in verifying the progress, and that's why we have the KPIs. And in our case, our climate roadmap is very much based on science-based targets, as we take that as kind of the most credible source of climate science. And now we are, as mentioned, working towards getting similar roadmap by setting the science-based targets for nature. Then when we started kind of considering working more on nature topics besides just the certified fibers, we kind of really leveraged on our existing sustainability efforts. So it was much easier to start on the work on science-based targets for nature when we already had set the science-based targets for climate. So in many cases, the scopes and boundaries are very similar in different sustainability topics. So when we do efforts in one area, it also benefits kind of other topics. And then lastly, collaboration with partners in the value chain is crucial to get kind of sustainable and long-lasting impacts. And as mentioned, the nature challenges are joint problems throughout the value chain, and solving them might require moving away from the traditional supplier-customer relationship and into this more collaborator-like relationship. And then lastly, I was asked to kind of give some points on how we would like to be engaged by customers on nature topics. And these may be very kind of clear or not very insightful, but I think these are still important to mention. So firstly, just following kind of global and regional regulation and reporting formats, just because we already have a lot to report, as I believe everyone here understands, and so it's always easier to just kind of copy paste and maybe do little adjustments there than to report something completely new. Then secondly, I think leveraging the collaboration platform in requesting data is great. We are at least reporting already through EcoVadis and CDP. So if our customers would like to get the data, the most kind of convenient way is just to send the request through these platforms. And I think it's great if more and more companies are joining, you get kind of more bang for your buck and really start to make or get insights from those. And then lastly, I would say even if you have your own kind of reporting format and platforms, I think the most important thing is just to be very clear with communication and instructions and give enough time to comply. I think this is clear to everyone, but I think it's just good kind of to emphasize that as the last point. And at least from Ahlstrom's perspective, we're always kind of happy to answer any questions and help our customers in their nature journey, since we are also doing that and it's a joint effort. But I think it's good to give some time and kind of guidance if there's something you wish specifically from us. But I think with these pointers, we would be kind of, at least from Ahlstrom, more than happy to answer any nature-related engagement. Yeah, so thank you for listening, and I guess now we'll go to our Q&A session.
And sorry, I'm going to stop sharing so that we can see people again, is what I just said. But thank you everyone for staying on. Hopefully that was a fun session with some insightful topics, and hopefully great to hear from Melissa, sorry you were losing your voice, and Laura at the end to give a kind of supplier view as well and how to engage with them. If anyone has any questions, then feel free to be brave and to ask them now, or put them in the chat if you prefer.
Everybody should be able to take themselves off mute if they so wish now.
I don't mind making a comment. I feel like, first of all, it was great to hear the supplier voice. It's something that I think is absolutely critical. I know, Emma, this is passionate to you because you're obviously a supplier to the GSKs of the world and many others. And I think it was great to hear Ahlstrom's point of view there. It does feel to me like that we need to keep remembering the lessons we've learned or tried to learn on climate, human rights when engaging suppliers. You know, a lot of the same challenges apply. You know, don't bamboozle them, don't overload them. All of those messages still ring true. I know it was one of the big challenges we raised in the peer group for nature was what can we learn from the Scope 3 peer group? So what is it that we've learned on other topics? Because the challenge is often still that ability to collaborate and listen and empathise with suppliers. That was one thing I took from it.
Right, Sonny.
Elodie, come on, you can talk. I know you.
No, Alessandra's raised their hand.
All right, then go on, Alexandra.
Sorry, Oliver, the team here. Thank you for the presentation. It was really great. And I agree. I think the balance between regulating the suppliers and also the internal stakeholders and leaving enough flexibility for new ideas and new solutions, which I think are super critical for this topic. I think that balance is very critical because on one hand, you want to embed it and you need to have some guardrails. But on the other hand, so many solutions are new out of the box. And you need to keep a culture where that is tested and trialed. I think it's very critical. So thank you for crystallizing that through this conversation.
Great point.
I think you scared Elodie and she's run off.
That's not normally true. Elodie's normally got.
Yes, sorry.
That's all right.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, it was Marina who spoke about, it was Emma, about restoring projects when you had to restore remaining restoring project, and you mentioned some project on it. Can you please elaborate on this?
I think the project I would have mentioned would have been honestly a very generic example, Elodie. We've certainly not done any restoration in my current company. I think the difference that I was saying around restoration and offsetting was that restoration is where you generally look at where you're having your impact, and then you look to restore where you're having your impact, which when it comes to deforestation and considering the regulations that are coming out will be much easier to do because you will know where you're having your impact. And the forestry industry is more mature as well in aligning to standards and actually conducting restoration work in comparison to, for example, the plastic industry. So what I was saying is it's interesting to look at industries in their own maturity when you get to restoration. And I would say the forestry industry is far more mature than the plastics one. So you would need to look at your restoration component with your minimization component, with your avoidance component. I would say look at it in totality to understand what's going to get you the most bang for your buck, in short. That was the point that I was making.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question to, I think, Melissa, you were talking about a piece of work that PwC was going to do on biodiversity and the CSRD or something like that.
Yeah.
Can you unpack that a bit more?
Yeah, so that's an internal piece of work, but an internal piece of work to look at what the history of the work on nature and how that kind of translates into metrics that could help fill out CSRD and EUDR and help adapt the work into kind of modern day regulation. It's quite difficult sometimes when you have been doing this for so long in a certain way to then have verifiable information to fill out some of these requirements that we now need to. So PwC is doing a piece of work on that. And to your question on restoration as well, so Unilever has done it started to do some restoration, and that is always through, as Emma said, kind of it's a supply shared approach. So it will be looking at kind of our impact on deforestation and looking at the surrounding kind of areas and what could be restored. And then there's so many kind of there's so much potential investment, and this is where we kind of like talk about kind of money supporting supply chain work. But Unilever works with certain investors to do these kind of production protection approaches. So for palm oil, they would kind of have a public-private partnership where they'll look at an area of sourcing palm oil. They'll look at kind of what suppliers are operating in the areas, what kind of funders want to fund into the areas, and then the investors will look at the forest to be restored around the palm oil plantations while we're increasing the amount of palm that's being produced. So what we're trying to do is kind of small landscape or jurisdictional projects where you're producing more palm oil, increasing the farmer's livelihood and restoring the kind of the surrounding forest. So that's some of the types of projects that we look at, and we do that mainly through groups like the Tropical Forest Alliance and 1T.org through the World Economic Forum. But there's so many kind of like potential restoration projects that some of these organizations such as 1T.org and the Tropical Forest Alliance are really trying to kind of plug into corporate supply chains. There's lots of good stuff to read on that and guidance as well, which we can share if useful.
I think that would be great to share it, Melissa. We were just talking about it with Marina that we need to put some more stuff on our link. So maybe we'll put that as a resource for people to go to the chapter. Be great.
Excellent. Well, we're almost out of time. I don't mind taking the opportunity to say thanks to Emma and Marina for putting this together. Huge help. And I know you're only just starting as the Nature chapter, but you're going to get lots of people wanting to join as more and more procurement professionals realise what they can do on this. So huge thanks for pulling it together. And for Melissa and Laura and everyone else that has participated as well. Really huge thanks for getting involved. We really appreciate it, and great to see so many good faces on here. So just as a reminder, obviously, if you want to be part of this Nature chapter, again, the chapter is very much a group effort. It's run by volunteers. Everyone chips in, and it really is about helping to capability build procurement specifically. That's what we're really trying to do. And there may be all sorts of things that the chapter can develop and do as procurement tries to understand nature. So definitely get in touch with Marina or Emma if you're interested in helping, suggesting stuff. And obviously on the flip side, if you're more of a nature role, less of a procurement role, you can obviously join the Nature peer group as well. You're very welcome. Both things are free. Both are intended to be peer-to-peer, and everyone's welcome. But great 90 minutes. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate that. Well done, Melissa, for hanging on with that voice. And you've obviously been partying all weekend. That's obviously what it is, I'm sure. But no, it's great to see you all. And yeah, hopefully see you all again soon.